Hi, I'm Pete Ostergard, partner with Edgewater Capital Partners, a sector-focused lower middle market private equity firm investing in what we call the performance materials space. For us, this means the advanced materials, engineered components, specialty chemical, and life sciences sectors. We look for businesses that produce or provide mission-critical, highly engineered products or services that are key to enabling the performance of an end product or system. One example of our investment strategy is Fiber Materials, a business that we owned from 2016 through early 2020. I'm excited to be joined by two of my partners from that investment, Rakesh Kapoor, current operating partner with Edgewater Capital Partners, and Mark Miklos, vice president with Spirit AeroSystems, and formerly the CEO of Fiber Materials during our ownership. I'll turn it over to Rakesh to give a bit more background on the topic of our conversation today, safety and enabling high-performing safety cultures.
Since 1981, I've been working continuously in high-performance materials, and I now lead the materials automation practice at Edgewater. In particular, our practice encourages innovation in our companies by looking outside, connecting with our customers, our suppliers, consultants, universities, and government bodies. I'm delighted to be here with Mark Miklos and to introduce him. Mark has worked in advanced materials for more than 25 years at Morgan Ceramics and at the Prince and Eisen companies. He swiftly rose through the ranks to become a general manager, then ran a coatings business, a metals business, a ceramics business, as well as a brazing and soldering business. Mark and his family have enjoyed working and living in the Bay Area of California, in Cleveland, Ohio, and now live near Portland, Maine. In May 2017, Edgewater was delighted to welcome him as the new CEO of Fiber Materials, and since March 2020, FMI has been part of Spirit. Mark, always great to interact with you. Thank you for making some time. Maybe you can share with the audience a little bit about Fiber Materials and its history and products.
Sure, good to be here with you guys. So Fiber Materials has been around for about 50 years, a little over 50 years. Core technology is rooted in high temperature composites, particularly in carbon materials and silicon carbide products. So applications, pretty extreme conditions, solid rocket motors, thermal protection systems. We are a predominantly government contracted services company or manufacturing company, particularly to DoD, but also we do supply NASA with a lot of support on their deep space missions. A lot of these activities do require some pretty extreme processing. We'll talk a little bit about, I think, why that's particularly important for this conversation because of the processes and their hazards that come with them to produce these products. But a lot of good stuff we do. We support a lot of strategic missile programs and important missions that are particularly interested in the nation and our nation's security. So, team here in Maine is pretty proud to be able to support those efforts.
Great, thank you, Mark. Our topic of discussion today is industrial safety. I'm not just talking about safety. We're going to be talking about empathically transforming a company's culture, starting with industrial safety and leveraging that employee health and environmental issues and triggering a massive transformational cultural change. At Edgewater, safety is one of the first assessments we make of any company we look at, and we truly believe that industrial safety practices and the overall safety culture of the organization speak volumes about how the company is being run. Why do this now? I think the topic is important for two reasons as we return back to work. First, there's a wave of reshoring that's occurring. For 30 years, I've watched manufacturing plants all over the US shut down and move to Asia. At least some of them are coming back. And as we work with materials and processes that are sometimes very familiar and can lull us into complacence, we feel it's critical that we hold on to all the learnings and improvements in industrial safety and culture enhancement from the 1990s and earlier. And secondly, of course, I'm referring to the reopening of the US economy post-pandemic. In the lower middle market today, we're seeing considerable excitement driven by both of these forces. We believe it's very important that we put our employees, our suppliers, our visitors, and all of our stakeholders' safety as a first priority as we work to develop these new opportunities. Mark, let's kick this off going back to the beginning of when you first arrived at FMI in May of 2017. What was your assessment of the safety situation and culture? Why did this even become a topic for your consideration?
So Rakesh, yeah, that's an interesting question. So first and foremost, I think the priority for any leader of an organization should be safety. And at the end of the day, should be the first thing they address as they come in as a new leader in the organization. For FMI in particular, it wasn't a very poor safety record. It was actually fairly decent over the years. But if you mine down into the organization and you start looking at it from a behavioral based methodology and a culture, there was a lot of luck involved in that performance, and something we had to address pretty quickly.
Mark, dive a layer lower for me. What were some of the specific things that you were facing that made you realize, hey, this is something I need to tackle early on?
Yeah. So it's obviously coming into as a CEO in the mission of the private equity to really transform a business and to increase the value. We were going to grow the business. We had plans for growth, and when you assess how the business was operating, the performance of the teams, we knew very quickly that once we started putting pressure on the organization, we were going to see some of that strain, and that's where the risk would really come to the surface, particularly around safety. The other part of this, the two primary focuses. One was the business is a defense contractor. A lot of processes are locked in. That means there's a lot of manual processes that can't be changed. That leads to and develops very high risk around repetitive motion injuries, soft tissue, and we saw a lot of that. The other was, of course, high hazard processes. We process materials at extreme pressures, very high temperatures. So the potential for serious injury or fatality occurrences was definitely evident in that. So those are the two areas we really addressed. And the first, of course, was really developing a strategy, and that was going to focus on that some of the manual processes to really reduce those repetitive motion injuries.
And of course, over the next few years, you led FMI down a health safety journey. As you look back now, tell us a little bit about the big steps. How did you get started? What were the first steps you took?
Right. So like any strategy, we approached safety to develop a plan, starting with a vision, starting with that mission and really cascading into a clear-cut plan of tactical actions to drive that. I come from a basis of lean manufacturing and particularly deploying Hoshin Conry into businesses, and the same methodology was effective here, focusing on managing the process, not the objectives or the metrics. So we really drove leading indicators to emphasize and move the needle around safety. Pretty quickly, though, we had a lot of things going on. We were growing. We had a lot of opportunities. I recognized pretty early on that I needed some help on it. We started seeing a pretty increase, as that started growing, we started seeing a significant increase in repetitive motion injuries. And thankfully, this is when Rakesh was on board. I knew Rakesh's background in developing culture around safety at Saint-Gobain. So I reached out to him. He came on, and as a team, we really developed a program that's been pretty effective.
Mark, you touched on it a little bit there in your previous response, but I'd be curious. We often see change management being one of the biggest obstacles facing organizations as they embark on these new projects. I'd be curious how you managed that and overcame it as you launched this safety initiative at FMI.
Yeah, it was challenging because the organization, again, it had very low turnover historically. That in itself posed some significant challenges when it comes to change management. We had some very caustic cultural elements in certain parts of the business. It relied heavily on very tenured employees that had a lot of technical knowledge that weren't necessarily strong leaders. So very quickly, we identified the need to to address that just from an overall leadership point of view, leadership resources across the business. We began with the H&S leader. On paper, he was perfect, and this is one of the things that it's always a pitfall. You know, doing behavioral based interviewing is really effective to identify some of the pitfalls, but on paper was fantastic, but really wasn't the individual was going to lead us to a true culture change. So we started addressing that to develop stronger leaders, that we then cascaded that into the line managers and others. And it was challenging because we went through a pretty significant turnover. 2018, I think we had about 40%, over 40% turnover in the entire organization. So it's challenging when you're growing, but it was really important that we built that strong leadership that was founded in, you know, the transparency and trust throughout that, which is a foundation of the culture journey.
Mark, at the onset, I remember you saying to me, you know, you'd managed many locations at a major multinational that had very good safety record. And here we were, three of us, starting down a journey, applying the sort of Edgewater approach to safety, which was different, felt different. When you look back, what were the things you learned? What surprised you? What sort of new tools did you need to leverage?
A lot of the tools, there was a theme that I was able to pull. A lot of consistent tools remained in the organization, you know, focusing on, as I mentioned before, managing the process for improvement, not focusing on metrics and lagging indicators. You know, things like the PDCA methodology of making sure that we're constantly assessing our performance and adapting as we go through that. Things like that were pretty consistent, which was helpful. But the learning really came from the recognition that you really need to be. For me, it was you needed to be patient. This is a multi-year journey. You're gonna get incidents occurring that come out of the blue. You're gonna feel, you know, you're gonna be at the all-time highs of your performance on safety, and all of a sudden you're gonna be, you know, smacked in the head with another incident, and everything's gonna be reset. So understanding really that this is a 5-year journey, that, you know, just to see really transformation of a culture, that's really important for yourself as a leader, but the entire team. And you need to communicate that across the board, because that could be pretty demoralizing when things like that happen.
Mark, what are some examples of the culture change that you witnessed as you went through this journey?
Yeah, that's actually it's interesting. We make it a point to highlight a lot of that when we start seeing evidence of a culture change. So transparency is huge, trust is huge, and having and empowering employees at every level of the organization to be able to affect that change is pretty important. So one couple areas when, you know, I'll just highlight that you see. So one is when you prioritize safety above all. So we have a mantra. It's safety, quality, on-time delivery. And we actually financially incentivize our team on those 3 performance areas, and they trigger each one. So if you don't get your safety metrics, or you don't do your activities, you don't get paid on the next, and so on. So what that does is that emphasizes that and it empowers everybody on the floor, particularly operators and people that are operating, you know, risky equipment and manufacturing a product. They can stop the process. They can stop the process and potentially risk on-time delivery, things like that, but they know they can do that. So when you start seeing people actually intervene in a process, stop it, have a safety stand down without even consulting their supervisor or leadership, that's a pretty impactful indication that you're starting to get through to people. So it's that empowerment and seeing people take advantage of that to really interject and make sure that they're prioritizing safety above all. That's when you start seeing the needle move on it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing and pretty far off from where things were when you came in the door.
Oh yeah, every time we would have an occurrence, there would be somebody that was there a while back in the years would say, you know, there would be heck to pay if somebody stopped the line like that, or you know, evacuated this area or stuff like that. So it's pretty effective.
Mark, one completely new dimension that you introduced at FMI was getting the employee families and the personal life sort of engaged and involved in the safety. Tell us a little bit about that. What has been the personal involvement, and what signs, physical signs, do you see in the workplace that tell you that engagement is proceeding?
I think one of the things that, Rakesh, you had provided the insight on very, really early on is how effective and how important, when you're trying to change a culture, how important or impactful it is to make it personal. Being able to really draw in how, an incident or an occurrence affects not just the company or the employee or the employees, but the families when they go back, and how it affects and just reverberates across an individual's family system. So bringing that element into the culture change, the more you can do that, the more effective and impactful it could be to really move that needle. We've had opportunities to really drive the communication. We've had, times when there's been incidents, we'll have family members come into the organization. A lot of times it's because they're coming in to support, either they get paperwork. We take that advantage of that and we bring them in and have them interact with some of the other team members, just to kind of highlight the impact of how unsafe acts and behaviors affect not just the organization, but the families that are supporting all of us. The other part is, if you walk in through the organization, we have boards set up in a lot of areas of the company. And it provides people opportunities to post personal messages and family members' pictures and tell people why they're safe and they want to be safe when they come into work. And this is what I'm being safe for, which is pretty interesting because it draws that personal nature into the organization, which, a lot of times we don't have a chance to do that across the board. So it's an element that really brings in the effect of what happens, not just the family or the company, but the family itself.
Yes, as you were speaking, I was remembering in the weaving area, I think was one of the first ones. I remember you showed me a board with all the little children's pictures, some new babies, and then some that were less than 10, 11 years old. And each of them was sort of coming from one or more of the operators in the weaving area. That's right.
Sometimes the most challenging is getting us as leadership and the leadership team to actually start to post those pictures, because sometimes we feel the most vulnerable, but we try to do what we can.
Mark, what difficulties did the culture change process face? Were there people opposed to it and didn't want to engage? And then how did you get around these sorts of people that were, let me say, blockers or fighting the change?
Yeah, so one of the biggest learnings, I think, in the effective part of this process is understanding how to apply the innovation adoption curve to a cultural change, particularly around safety. Safety is, you would think safety is something that nobody can argue with. That's probably one of the most powerful parts of it. It is very difficult to argue about being safe, right? But ultimately, you have very powerful laggards on the end that really hard to pull forward and to get them to adopt and to come forward with the change in the culture. And I've personally, in my past, have wasted a ton of time focusing on trying to change the minds and get that adoption on those laggards that are very few. There's just a few, but they're very powerful because a lot of times they're very loud voices in the organization. So the idea that's effective that we've deployed that's fundamental in this process is we spend all of our time focusing on the early adopters. We get that groundswell, leveraging them to be able to build essentially the army of influencers throughout the organization. And as you reach a point of saturation, if you will, and Rakesh, I think you said somewhere around 65% or so, what happens is the laggers then have that, oh crap moment. They better get on a bus or they're going to leave. And a lot of them do leave. They self-select and they exit the organization. Sometimes we have to take the stance and remove them from the organization for safety reasons. But that's really fundamentally not wasting your time on the laggards. Focus on the early adopters, build that army of influencers, and at some point, it's gonna take on a mind of its own.
Mark, I'd be curious, such a massive change to the culture within safety. Did you Did you see any spillover effect from that into other parts of the organization?
You have to believe that, you know, safety is a foundation for any high performance organization. So, you know, the methods and the rationale of that behavior-based approach to safety is, you know, the safety culture promotes a world-class culture itself, and an organization's culture then promotes high performance, and performance translates into high performance in business. So we saw huge swings in increased morale. Team building is off the charts. I mean, it creates such a close knit group of teams in the organization because they're all sort of rowing the boat in the same direction. And obviously that just translates into the other priorities of the business. Quality goes up, productivity goes up. It's really an effective tool that any organization that wants to be world-class has to start with a world-class culture around safety, for sure.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience that you led and lived through. Certainly not easy, but I think it's a great story. And if I recap your main points, a way to build up the teams, to increase morale, to get quality, productivity, throughput increases, but also by recognizing that it's a long-term process, that it's multi-year. You can't get discouraged when you sort of stub your toe at the first small incident that occurs. You talked about a change of leadership in some places necessary. You talked about ignoring the laggards and focusing on the early adopters. And then my personal favorite, really getting the families and personal lives of the employees engaged and sort of involved in the workplace, in the cultural transformation. Wow, what a journey. Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, for making time today. And you know, I'm sure our other CEOs that will listen and be starting the journey will very much appreciate the insights that you're providing.
No, thanks for giving me a chance to share, and thanks for all your support.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rakesh. Enjoyed the conversation.